This week on the Golf Performance Show, we're going to talk with the genius of Jack Nicklaus. So last week we talked about Tiger Woods and all the little things he did to be a great player. This week it's all about Jack. You could argue who is better, Jack or Tiger. I personally think it's a tie. With Jack, there's really not a lot known about what he actually did to be a great player. The three main things that I've identified that makes him great is his mind, the mental game, and then his speed off the tee, and then his putting. So we're going to break all three of those down in detail and give you some little tactics to how you can improve those three areas of your game. I'd also just like to make a quick shout out. I have a new winter home for in-person lessons, the Virtual Golf Club in Burlington. You got to check these guys out. They're doing some amazing work. They set up an area that's really made for golf addicts. They've got 4 TrackMans, which includes TrackMan IOs. They've got a gym, a members lounge, a putting green, a fitting shop, fitters on site, fitness trainers on site, and golf coaches like myself on site. The Virtual Golf Club, you're going to be blown away by how good this facility is. You've probably heard me talk about this before. My 3-month mentorship, the most popular program that I have. It's an online program, so you can do it from the comfort of your home. Essentially what you do is you send me in your swings and you send me in your launch monitor data, and in return I give you back a full report, a full lesson on how you can improve it with drills, feels, fundamental changes. My big thing with anyone I work with online is that you're going to get a coach in your pocket, so we'll be communicating 24/7, and we're really going to break down your swing to the little moving parts. But my big thing is I don't want to overhaul your swing. I just want to take what you currently have, shine a spotlight on some TrackMan metrics that I think can really help you improve, and overall that's going to help you hit it more solid, have a better ball flight, and overall lower your scores. So check it out below in the show notes. I've got the 3-month mentorship link that you can directly sign up for. If you just want to learn a little bit more, I'll also drop a link for a consultation call so you can talk to me and have a little bit of a strategy talk around your game. Okay, so let's get right into it. I want to talk everything about Jack Nicklaus, and Jack is one of those guys that, to me, in 2024, is a bit of a mythical figure. We know his records. We always see them when they compare Tiger, they compare Scottie Scheffler. You know, you see the 18 majors, you see all the runner-ups he had in major championships. Some people regard him as the GOAT. Other people regard Tiger as the GOAT. But I really want to go into Jack's strengths. What was he better at than everyone else, and what elevated him to that level? And you could say that, oh well, Jack isn't the GOAT because he wasn't in Tiger's era, there wasn't as much competition. He wasn't in Scottie Scheffler's era, there wasn't as much competition. But I really do believe that if you put Jack in a modern environment with modern 460cc drivers, modern equipment, modern fitness training methods, using statisticians, he would be by far and long the one of the best out there. So I want to talk, do it in a simple order. We're going to talk about Jack's mental and course management and practice habits. Then we're going to talk about Jack's swing and what made him hit it further than everyone else, because he was the Bryson DeChambeau of his era in terms of length. And then we'll talk about his putting to end off. So stay tuned to the end, because I think the putting tips is where you're going to really get the most out of it. So I'll borrow from a coach that I respect out there, Mike Malaska. He's down in Phoenix. And Mike got to work hand in hand with him. And he the main thing that he talked about with Jack when he got to witness him practice is he would spend large amounts of time on the driving range, but not hitting a lot of golf balls. And you wonder, well, why would you want to do something like that? Like, usually you want to be efficient. You want to get as many reps in as you possibly can to build your swing. But Jack was all about simulating pressure in practice. So he would maybe spend 2 hours on the driving range and only hit like 20 to 30 to 40 golf balls, which is not a lot at all. And Jack would like to take his time between shots. He'd really like to simulate a scenario under pressure, going through his full routine. And I think that's something that you can really learn a lot from for your own game, is have sessions, especially when you're more in competitive mode, like you're preparing for your club championship, or you're preparing for a big match or any tournament. Like if you're an NCAA player, you're preparing for your NCAA season. Have sessions where you spend maybe an hour to 2 hours on the range and go through your whole motion like you're actually on the golf course and simulate your pre-shot routine. Even paint a scenario in your mind, like this is me on the 4th hole at the US Open. I've got a 1-shot lead and I have to hit the fairway here. You put those little scenarios around your practice, and it will build pressure. Now, some things that I always like to think about actionable practices you could do to build that pressure, and we could think about upright challenges, ladder drills, and shot shaping drills. So the upright challenge, you maybe heard me talk about this in the previous podcasts. Basically, you're picking 2 targets out on the range. Think about a field goal post, and you're trying to lace it through there every time. One thing I did for myself personally a few years ago was I brought a journal out to the driving range every time, and I would do a 5-ball challenge with a 9-iron, a 5-ball challenge with a 7, 5-ball with a 4-iron, 5-ball with a driver, and I was basically just trying to get 4 out of 5 or better. And I figured if I could get 4 out of 5 or better through the upright challenge, then I'm doing really well. And as I got better at it, I tightened that upright a little bit more. So that's a big one. I think if you're if you're building practices into your driving range routine where you're making the fairways harder than what you would see on the golf course, when you get out onto the golf course, and I've said this before, on those hardest holes, they're not going to feel too intimidating because you've done it over and over again. And, if you fail at it, if you can only go, 1 out of 5 or 0 out of 5, then that's totally okay. If you aim small, you're going to miss small, and that practice will just get better over time. I found when I started that upright training, I was terrible at it. I couldn't really do much with it. And I would only get maybe 1 out of 5, and this was at a scratch level. Now, as I pushed more and more, my accuracy got better and better. I think the one thing you just got to make sure of with the upright challenge is that you're not slowing your swing down or trying to guide it. Like, you should be aggressive towards the target to a small little upright, okay? So aggressive swings to tight targets, that's super important. Now, what you could do with your chipping and your pitching and your wedging would be ladder drills. So you stop the ladder if you fail. So you're going to hit a shot to 5 yards. You're going to try and then your next shot, you're going to try and land the ball at 5 yards, let it roll out to about 7 to 8 yards. And then now you have that 8-yard target. You're going to try and land on an 8 yards. And you're just going to build the ladder the whole way up the driving range, all the way until about a full wedge. And it's just going to improve your touch that much more. I often get questions on, okay, what do I actually, how do I get better with chipping, pitching, and wedging? And I really think they're all very similar art forms. And a lot of it comes down to distance control, and you might hear about a clock system where you take it back this far for a 30 yard and then back halfway for a 70 yard, whatever. I think it's much better to actually build the ladder and really build your feel where you can be on the golf course and eyeball a shot at 52 yards and you don't even know it's 52 yards and you have a really deep sense of the feel. I think that's really the best way the way the best wedge players in the world work. Another drill you could do that would simulate pressure would be a shot shaping drill. So Tiger did something like this, like a 9-window drill. You could even just do something as simple as aim the face. If you're a right-handed golfer, aim the face to the right, hit a fade, aim the face neutral, hit it straight, aim the face left, hit a draw, and just go fade, straight draw, fade, straight draw. Or you could even do, if you don't like shaping the ball, you could do low, medium, high. I'm more like that. I actually don't prefer to shape the ball too much. I'd rather just go low, medium, high, and you're really working on your feel, and also too you're simulating that pressure. So moving on to the next concept from what I learned from Jack, he believed there were a group of golfers that had more talent than him, but they feared winning, right? So Jack was the type of player where he wanted to be, in the last group on Sunday. He really wanted that. And I think a lot of that just comes down to making a decision to understand that, what are you ultimately playing golf for? If you're playing golf to enjoy it, that's fine. I love that. I love coming in and seeing people in my academy that just want to enjoy the game. But then there's also a group of golfers, probably like this too, if you're listening to a golf podcast, where you really want to, get to a level where that almost scares you a little bit, right? So I want you to consistently put yourself in that scenario, like we talked about with the practice habits, where you're simulating that pressure. You're really giving yourself the feeling like, okay, this really means something. Now, this is similar to Brooks Koepka. You see this in modern day players where Brooks believes that, for him, it's almost easier to win a major because you get to a certain level, on Sunday on a major where people just start to fold because the pressure gets a little bit higher. So Jack really firmly believed that there were golfers out there with much more talent than him, but he probably not true, but in his mind he believed it. And then when he got down to the wire, he believed that he wouldn't let anyone pass him. Another thing that's interesting about Jack too is, he was asked, I believe it was by Jim Nance, on being a champion, what it means to be a champion. And he kind of says he really doesn't know. But what's interesting is, he deeply believes that you need to understand yourself. So I really find that interesting. I watched about 10 interviews from Jack in preparation for the podcast, and he kept saying stuff like, I don't really know. And, I don't take those statements lightly. Like, Jack is someone who is very humble in his approach to the game, and he's very inquisitive on what's actually going to work. And I think that mindset of him feeling like he doesn't know makes him want to inquire for more knowledge. The guys I honestly have the toughest time with when it comes to my academy are the ones who are, the know-it-alls, the guys who think they have all the answers. And, I think really it's much more about being inquisitive, being humble enough to realize that, maybe you don't have all the answers. Maybe you have to go and search someone out to get an answer. Now, the next thing he said after he doesn't exactly know, he said, but he deeply believes you need to understand yourself. Like, you really need to understand what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and chart them out. And I want to actually bring you through a questionnaire that I will use with every student of mine that comes into my online academy. And I like to just have them answer this questionnaire, and it really just gives me a deep sense as to where they're at with their skill set. So I'll email it to them when they sign up, and I want to basically, I'll just bring you through this whole questionnaire right now. And I like to get people to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 because perception is very important. If you believe you're a certain way with your game, that's probably where we need to shine a spotlight. So I'll ask them to rate themselves on all these categories: driving accuracy, driving distance, woods off the tee, woods off the deck, long irons, mid irons, short irons, wedges, pitching and chipping, putting, green reading, putting, distance control, mental game, course management. And then I also have a few other categories for my elite players, like fitness, and then now. So next, after I've had them rate themselves on 1 out of 10, I want to know, and even if they're not keeping close stats, even just give me a feel, take a guess. Fairways in regulation, greens in regulation, up and down, putts per round. Just give it some statistics, because if we can measure, it's much easier than just guessing on where you're actually at. Like, you might feel like you're a good ball striker, but you're actually only hitting 5 or 6 greens in regulation. I always like to know, and these are some other more subjective questions, some objective as well too. Like, what is your main shot miss? That's very important for me. How many penalty strokes per round, your current handicap and your goal handicap, hours to commit weekly to practice, hours to commit weekly to playing, injuries and previous injury history. What do you view playing, practicing? How do you view your playing and practicing balance? Are you more of a player or a practicer? Very important, because I want to put you in the best learning environment for you to get better. Some golfers are range rats and they love that process. Others are more just, they want to play. They thinking about the driving range, it makes their stomach roll. And then how do you learn? Are you hands-on, visual, verbal commands, drills? That's very important to me, because for me personally, I'm very much, I need to see it to believe it, and I need to copy it, and then I'll actually put it into my own game. So for instance, I've used certain swings in the last few years to build something into my swing. Like, if you notice, I've got a very short backswing, and that's something I did for a long time that got me very efficient. But what I've realized now is that it limits my speed. So I'm looking at guys like Billy Andrade or Freddie Couples or Jake Knapp, even John Daly a little bit, getting that longer backswing, because when I see it on TrackMan, my club head speed goes from like 109 to 117, 118, which at my level as a pro, 9 miles an hour club head speed could equate to about 27 yards. So I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent there, but if you can have better processes to understand where you need to be at when you relate a swing feel to a TrackMan data, that's huge. And then the final thing I also like to understand with anyone I'm working with is the things that you're currently working on, and that's huge for me, because I believe that every golfer that comes in probably has their own idea of what they want to work on, and it's just about I want to blend the two. I don't want to just completely tear down what you're working on, and that's the big thing where I don't believe in swing rebuilds. I like taking a holistic approach to your game. So Jack also believed too that all of its evaluation should be done by yourself, and that's why I like to send the questionnaire off to my clients and then let them answer it on their own time, and then I'll kind of go through it and pick apart the things that really need to be picked apart. And then he got on to the next topic with Jim Nantz, where he talked about how he doesn't like that professionals, modern day professionals, have so many experts to help one golfer. And I think he said this at least 15 years ago in this interview. It wasn't a recent interview. And you see that more and more. Like, professional golfers have a psychologist, they have a mental game guru, they have a chipping guru, they have a putting guru, a swing guru, fitness. Like, there's so many things. We're basically trying to compartmentalize every part of our game, and I think there's value in that. But I also think that if you are the master of your own game, you're the CEO of your own game, it becomes much easier to push yourself in the right direction, because you end up knowing yourself. Like, the worst thing that I think can happen to any good player is you get put into a system that is just a system because we've proven that the stats say that this system work. But every golfer has their own little way of doing things. Like, I don't do well with verbal commands, and I've had some elite coaches in the past I've worked with that are really big on verbal commands. So I really do think that golf is moving in the direction of the medical system, where we have a knee doctor, a foot doctor, a heart doctor. We have all these different doctors, and we're sicker than ever. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Again, I think you need to have, I'm no medical expert, so if you're a doctor or nurse out there, I'm sorry. But I do think that if we're looking at the body as more of a holistic, in a holistic sense, it becomes much easier to diagnose the real problem. Now, I typically see these things linked. Like, if you're a bad chipper, why are you a bad chipper? Are you a bad chipper because you're a bad chipper, or are you bad because you're missing so many greens and we should actually work on your ball striking, right? So, Jack probably had maybe 1 or 2 coaches at a time, and I think it's important to, maybe work with just 1 coach or 2 coaches, where you can get to a point where 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line, you're the master of your own game. You go from the janitor to the CEO, and that's what I'm big on. Like, anytime anyone goes through my 3-month plan, I want them to get to the point where when they're at the end of it, they're like, okay, Cam, I really don't need you anymore. So I'm big on like almost working myself out of a job. I want my golfer that I'm working with to get to a point where they feel like they can master the game, because it's good in general for the game. That person, if they get to the point where they're 3 months down the line and they really know their game deeply and they've seen improvement, they're going to go tell 20 of their friends that I did a good job, as opposed to the typical lesson drip where it's like, okay, let's work on your knees this week, let's work on your elbows this week, let's just work on one thing at a time and really not spell out what you actually need to do to get from where you're at now to where your goals need to be. So Jack, talking about Jack, like with course management, he kept things very simple. Like he believed that there's going to be 14 easy holes out there, and there's going to be, probably 4 danger holes out there that you really need to keep an eye on. And with those 4 danger holes, those are really the holes that are going to dictate your score for that given day. The 14 easy holes, you're probably going to make your pars on, your birdies on, maybe a couple bogeys here and there. Obviously, it depends on skill level, but you really need to evaluate those 4 danger holes, or it might be 2, it might be 5, it might be 6, depending on how hard the course is, on what your actual strategy is going to be. So if you notice that there's I'll give you an example. Hamilton Golf and Country Club, you might know it. It's the host of the Canadian Open quite a few times. I was lucky to be a member there for a few years, and there were always a couple holes out there. I believe on the tournament course it was 14 and 15 that were 2 dogleg rights, and at the time I was always hitting a draw, so they were very hard for me as a right-handed golfer to aim up the right tree line and bring it back. And those 2 holes were absolutely brutal for me. As I played there for about a year, and I realized if I just take a little 3-wood, choke it down a little bit, and hit a little cut off the tee, it's actually easier for me to stay on top of it as opposed to hanging back on a driver. And I track my scoring average that year hole by hole, and I noticed that holes 14 and 15 I got much better on, because I manufactured a shot that I could get out into play. Now, again, statisticians might go against that and they say, well, no, you need to aim up the middle on every time, but I definitely think there are the odd occasion, maybe 2 or 3 holes per round, where you have to have some sort of manufactured shot to get it out and play and give yourself a correct angle. Again, all the stats nerds out there are going to go nuts on me for saying angle, because they don't like angle. They like everything to do with dispersion cones, and I do agree with that a lot, but I also think that angles do matter in golf. You really just got to understand where you're weak. I think that's the big thing that Jack was talking about, and play for it, right? Like, if you're noticing that on any given day that you're terrible out of bunkers, like Jack was not a good bunker player, so his big thing was to do anything at all costs to miss bunkers. You're going to get some PGA Tour players that are the opposite, where they're one of the top 5 bunker players on tour. So if they get themselves into trouble, they might actually be aiming in a bunker to get up and down from, as opposed to not being great. Like I always notice, for me, I'm very good with lag putting, so I'm not really too bothered if I'm hitting it onto the fringe. I'll actually sometimes aim for the big fat fringe spots, because I might have a 40-footer where I'm 6 feet off the green, and I generally lag it to within tap-in range. So, the next thing we're going to talk about with the strengths and weaknesses, again, this kind of, plays into what I just mentioned. Jack believed if you try and do the same thing as everyone else you're doing, you're not going to be able to maximize your talents. And again, looking at when you're working with a coach, you got to understand that this coach has probably developed a system that generally works for his game, but also works for the masses. So you always have to be willing to challenge your coach to realize that, are you just putting me into a system just because it's worked for everyone else? If I always find the guys that really challenge me and say, like, well, is this going to work for me? Like, is this actually something that I can take from my game and see it on the course? That's when I'll give it a little bit more thought and a little bit more of a fine tune to make sure that it is actually going to work for them. Because as a coach myself, giving 30 to 40 lessons per week, there are some things you have to just say to people that are more general in their knowledge, like chipping mechanics. I do find that most times, if you want to hold on to the wrists a little bit longer, that's a much more reliable approach, putting the ball position in the back, leaning the shaft forward. But I do get some guys coming in that just can't do it. They just can't feel it. They get awkward. They lay the sod behind it. So I have to move them to a bit more of a releasing model. And it's just important to understand, again, where you're weak, and then how can you maximize it and make your own system out of it. So the more you know yourself, the better it gets. Now, this leads into the next topic with Jack, where, he was basically of the belief that he doesn't compete against anyone. He competes against himself and the golf course. And that's huge. Like, if you're in a competitive environment and you're seeing, like, John down the range, who's, always shooting 65 and you're shooting 69 every time, and he's beating up on you all the time, it's not about competing against him, it's about competing against yourself. And again, really putting the mirror on yourself on a day-to-day basis and understanding where you're weak. Like, I know for me personally, I am weak from a standpoint of overall strength. I've talked about that before, and hitting it a large distance. And I'm also weak at my putting right now, especially for mid-range. My birdie chances, like my par chance percentage, my make percentage with par is way higher than my birdie percentage. So I work a lot on mid-range putting, like from 8 feet to 25 feet. And then I'm also working a ton right now in my off season on getting more speed, getting longer in the gym, just bulking up overall, also getting the flexibility better. So there should be a portion of your year for at least 3 months where you put the clubs away and all you do is work on weaknesses, because really your strengths are not going to go away. Like if let's say you're an elite chipper and you don't chip for 6 months, it'll probably take you about 2 to 3 weeks to get your chipping sense back. But it's just like riding a bike with your strengths. You're not going to lose them. But I do think when you get into the season, it should be fully focused on strengths and then just try and manage your weaknesses. So next thing about Jack, he always believes he could have done better. Like he was never satisfied with his efforts. That's something that I heard him say so many times in his interviews. He's obviously proud of himself for what he's done, but he always felt like he could have pushed for more. And you see this in the way he is with stuff like fishing. Like he got into fishing later in life, and there's stories of him having to go back out if he didn't catch the biggest fish over time and try and catch the biggest fish against his friends. He's even competitive with his wife when it comes to fishing, but he's also happy for his wife. So he's a really competitive guy. Even little things like throwing a game where he throws sandbags. I think cornhole, and I know it's bigger in America. I'm Canadian, so cornhole is a little bit of a, it's not big for us. But, Jack, like anything he did, he was super competitive in. And Tiger is that way. Scotty Scheffler is that way. All these greats are that way, where they had to win. They couldn't handle losing. They hated losing more than they liked winning. So I want you to take that to heart. Like when you have a failure in your game, I really want you to take it to heart, but I don't want you to get emotionally attached to it. I just want you to think about that, hey, I can do better, I can strive for more. And again, just going back to what Jack would talk about, being naturally inquisitive, I think that's important. I think you want to really always have the mindset as a golfer that there is more to learn, there is more to know. The moment you get to that point where it's like, I kind of have it, I know what I'm doing, I'm at the level I want to be at, is the moment you start to go backwards. And I always find that with the guys who come in who are challenging my knowledge in a way where they're just trying to prove more to me, and because I definitely get them occasionally, which I love in a way, like they have the confidence and belief that their knowledge is correct. But those are the guys that really tend to struggle to get better, because they're looking at the game through the coach's lens and not the player's lens. So if you can be naturally inquisitive, but then add simple practices into your game, then that's where we need to be. And it reminds me off the top of my head of what Jack would do at the start of every season. Jack would sit down with his coach, and they would go through the boring stuff, the stuff that no one really wants to look at, the posture, the grip, alignment, the ball position. Like he would literally relearn how to grip the club, because he believed that over time, the more and more you played, the more these little simple things would get off. And I definitely think that's the case for most golfers. Like when I get someone in for a lesson, even like some of the best players I've ever worked with on the Asian Tour, or top flight NCAA D1 players, they'll come in and maybe 2 of their fundamentals are off. If it's the average golfer, it's probably 3 of their fundamentals are off. And if it's a newer golfer, all the fundamentals are off. So that PGA +1, which Brooks Koepka talks about, posture, grip, alignment, ball position, right now I bet for you there's at least 2 of those things that are off. And if you fix those things, they're going to really mean a lot for your game. So just to kind of put a pin on the mental stuff, like Jack extended this to the golf course. Like he always believed that the golf course would win no matter what. He's talked about that quite a bit. And you just need to do your best to basically try and win against the golf course. It's not about your competitors. It's about you and the golf course. And you have to always look at every course as a new challenge. Like you can't just fit your game into any golf course. You have to be able to mold your game to that golf course. He also believed in the not competing against others, because you can't physically impose anything on them, and they're just a distraction. Like I would actually challenge you to, next time you play, if you're the type of golfer that gets influenced by other golfers, like let's say you're playing with really bad golfers and you always kind of play bad, then you play with golfers who are above your skill level and you tend to raise to their level, I would encourage you, unless it's with better players, because you can start to mirror them a little bit, don't watch them. I'll tell you a story from my brother. He won the Ontario match play quite a long time ago, which was a big tournament. You have to win 6 matches, and in 6 rounds he shot 20 under. It was one of his best performances ever, and he made a pact to himself that he wasn't going to watch one golf shot or one ball flight from his competitor all week, and he did it. And that he felt like that was a huge mental breakthrough for him because it really just set him in his own rhythm. He told me that he actually got to a point where he felt like he was out there by himself, even though he was in a match play, big stakes. Like if you win this tournament, you're going to get a really big scholarship. And he did it, and he really allowed himself to just drop into his own zone. We always typically play better when we play by ourselves. If you've ever played by yourself, you'll realize that, hey, I typically play better when there are no distractions around. Ben Hogan was that way, where you look away, you listen for the shot, and then you wait for your playing partners to say good shot or bad shot. And I think there's also, like, if you're playing a match play scenario, it's intimidating to not hear anything from that golfer. It almost gives your competitor the feeling that they don't exist, which is pretty intimidating. And again, I know it might not be proper golf etiquette. You want to encourage others to play better, and you want to see them hit better shots. So there's obviously a time and a place for it. But I think in a competitive environment, if you just look away and you don't even, you just decide to be in your own zone and not watch one golf shot, it will go far for you. And especially if you have a caddy too, let the caddy watch their shot. I would even go as far, and this might be a little controversial too, if you're really wanting to take this to the next level, is don't look for other playing partners' golf balls. Like, be in your own rhythm, go up your own side of the fairway, go for your ball. Again, if you're having a fun round, don't do that. You'll come off as an asshole. But if you're doing it with a competitive environment, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I've played with some great players in the past that really intimidated me, guys on the Korn Ferry Tour, guys on the PGA Tour, and I noticed that they are very into their own business. They're very selfish, and great players are selfish, and if you want to be at that next level, you need to be selfish. Obviously, say good shot, obviously be friendly, but when it comes to your game, you got to be into yourself. So, just threads of champions. I think I've probably mentioned this before. We'll cap off the mental game. Tiger, Scotty, Jack. We could look at all three of those, and you could look at the similarities. The big similarity is they all view pressure as fun. Like, they want to be there. It's no fun coming in at 2:00 on a Sunday with no chance to win, where all the drama is and where they're excited about is wanting to come in at 6 p.m. with a chance. So I think a lot of that is making a decision to understand that you want the pressure. When I was growing up myself personally, I never wanted the pressure. I wanted to push it away. I believe that there was a way to actually get rid of the nerves, get rid of the adrenaline, and it's just not possible. What I've committed to a lot later in my playing career now, and it's been paying off under pressure scenarios, is just actually wanting the nerves, like wanting to be that feeling of the heart beating on my chest, the feeling of my stomach is sick, it feels like everything is against me. I want to be that man in the arena where I can actually perform under pressure, and it's helping. I mean, my scoring isn't there yet, but I will say that when I'm in pressure scenarios on the golf course, they don't bother me as much. Like, even for me with recreational rounds in the past, I'd get nervous on the first tee, and now the first tee is just another swing for me. Okay, so I have a list here of 8 Nicklaus swing traits, and again, I mentioned at the start of the podcast, we're going to talk about how Nicklaus generates so much speed. I mean, even if you just spent a long time copying some of these traits, I think you would definitely get a lot further. You'll notice some things with Jack's swing, and you'll notice this with a lot of long players, is that being slightly across the top, and that's something that is typically demonized in golf. Every time you hear across the top, you think over the top, you think slice, you think bad swing, bad golfer. But you look at guys like Scotty Scheffler, Tiger in '97, who was probably arguably one of the longest golfers of all time for how heavy he was. Rory McIlroy, who's slightly across the top. Shane Lowry's another one who's not physically the most imposing guy, but hits it a far way for his physique. And Jack was across the top as well too. There's definitely something to be said about being across the top. It generates a little bit more club head speed. So if you notice that you're very laid off at the top, the shaft line is pointing out to the left. If you're a right-handed golfer at the top of your swing, for a lefty, you'd be pointing out to the right at the top of your swing, laid off. I would consider maybe thinking about going more across the top. Another example would be Victor Hovland. He's very across the top at the top, and that is going to generate more speed. I'm transitioning to getting myself a little more across the top and deeper. And when you create more of a hand path and get longer, that's definitely going to create more speed. The next one, you'll see Bryson DeChambeau put this into his game, the lead foot raise in the backswing. So you get that heel off the ground as you start to take the club away. It generates more ground force where you create vertical force up and down, and then you're able to kind of explode a little bit as you come into impact. I also think it just overall helps with efficiency and getting your feeling like your footwork. You get more into your heel as you come into the ball and more forward. So definitely the lead foot raise is a big one. Separation in the lower legs. You'll see that between his left knee and his right knee, there's a big separation there at the top of a swing. A lot of that is because his heel comes off the ground, but that the more separation you get, the more deeper turn you get with your trail hip. That's a big one too for creating more speed, especially if you're a slicer of the golf ball. I'd encourage you to just work on getting that right hit more back and more of a turning feeling in the backswing. Another one was the head tilt. I mean, you're not going to be able to see this. I'm trying to just do these little motions here on the podcast, but you're not going to be able to see this if you're just listening. But Jack would have a head tilt where he would look almost out of it with his left eye. And, he was left eye dominant for sure. But what that also did too is it opened up his shoulders so he can get a really deep shoulder turn going back. And that created more speed for him. It's a move you don't see often nowadays, but it's a really interesting one. If you try that, like if you have I think it's a good move if you have tight shoulders. And typically slicers of the golf ball have tight shoulders. I think in general we all have tight shoulders because we're hunched over at a laptop all day, or doing our work. But getting that head going back a little bit allows you to get a bit of a deeper turn. So try it out. Look at Jack's swing. You'll notice that a lot. Jack really fired from the top, and I think this is something that's really important is, it was full send from the top for him. And it's important to understand, is that good for you or is it bad for you? I think if you're slicing it off the world, firing it from the top might not be the best move for you. You want to work more on shallow and getting under the line first before you really go to this move. So it's definitely one of those progression moves where you want to get, under the line aggressively, like 3 or 4 degrees, club path into out before working on this. But if you have that move where you're more of a hook or a draw, I really want you to work on firing from the top. And even just as a speed training thing, go to the top, set it up there for about 2 to 3 seconds, and then fire from there. I don't think that's going to hurt anyone in terms of a drill, and maybe do it more as a practice swing drill. This goes outside of the swing, but Jack was a multi-sport athlete. He played football, he played basketball, he played all these different sports. Jack actually had the chance to be a scholarship player for Ohio State University as a football player. So this is more for the younger athletes because you got to be careful as you get older to not, have sports that could actually ruin your golfing career. But I think from a young age, you should be playing sports like basketball, soccer, and football. Those are the 3 ones I really like, because with sports like hockey or baseball, it can create motions that are hard to work your way out of. Like I see this all the time with the baseball players that I work with when they swing up, up at their neck level and they're swinging across to third baseline as a right-hand batter. They're learning slice mechanics over and over again. So those, if you learn baseball or hockey from a young age, it becomes very, very hard to work your way out of. There's a reason why some of the best cross athletes that come into golf are in basketball. You think of Steph Curry. In football, you think of Tony Romo. But there's not a ton of hockey players and baseball players that are great golfers. Maybe pitchers in baseball would be one where they're really good because they have an absurd amount of shoulder flexibility. So, two final things that Jack did. His exit path was elite, and what I mean by that is as you start to see the club move across his shoulders, you would always see it move in a very consistent manner, just under the armpit. The shaft line and the shoulder line are all in line, and again, it's going to be hard for you to visualize that if you're just driving, but think about as you start to see that club come through in a slow motion swing, his exit path throughout his career was always very elite. And then the final thing too, this kind of goes into ground force, is banking of the feet. Now Jack played in the Balata era. In the Balata era with golf balls, they were a lot spinnier, so you'd want to trap the ball a little bit more, and there was more of a reverse C motion where your spine would look a little bit more like this coming into the ball. But Jack's feet stayed very grounded. Now who do we see that in modern day? Tiger when he hits his irons, very grounded footwork. Rory McIlroy, if you look at his footwork all the way through impact, very grounded. Mo Norman, probably the best ball striker of all time, and Jack and Tiger would regard Mo Norman, Canadian, as the best golfer of all time in terms of accuracy. He kept his feet down for a long time. So let's talk about Jack's putting. In my opinion, probably the best putter of all time. You could put Tiger right there. You can maybe put Ben Crenshaw right there. But Jack really kind of understood, he was one of the best putter when it comes to, he made so many 20 to 25 footers when it mattered, and Tiger did the same thing. And I think that's the measure of a great putter. Everyone can be great from inside 10 feet, but can you make them when they matter? And Jack was huge on fundamentals. I believe he came up with a book. I have it somewhere in my library. I think it's called Putting My Way. That might not be the name of it. But anyways, check out Jack Nicklaus' putting book. There's so many little gems that you can take from there. I'll run you through some of the main points that I see from Jack that he talked about, and he did. His eyes were always directly over the ball, and you could get one of those putting mirrors and check out your eyes and make sure they're right in line. It doesn't need to be perfect, but essentially if you're a right-handed golfer and your eyes are too far over the ball, to the right of the ball, you're going to most likely pull more of your putts, and if the eyes are too inside the line, you're more likely going to push your putts. So eyes over the ball, you're going to see most PGA Tour players having some sort of mirror drill that they do. I just like the one where you stand over it, put a golf ball at your eye and another golf ball on the ground, and then drop the ball from your vision, and then just see the balls kind of hit each other. I'll do that at the start of every practice session. He was very low to the ground. It was an unorthodox look. Like, it was much more of an old-fashioned look. And I think, the modern putting stance has become very upright. We have all these tall putters. We're very far away from the ball. And I think that can ruin your sense of connection to the line, connection to the actual ball. So I want you to challenge yourself to lean a little bit more over at your hips and get closer to the ground so you can see you can have better vision. Another thing with soft hands, you're going to hear this from Ben Crenshaw, you're going to hear this from Tiger Woods, you're going to hear this from all the best putters, that soft hands typically improves your touch and improves your speed. Jack also believed in using the entire cup. So if you had a right to left putt, and this is really crucial because this actually improves your percentages of make. If you have an uphill putt, you slam it in the back. If you have a downhill putt, you drip it over the front edge. If you have a left to righter, you use the left side of the cup. If you have a right to lefter, use the right side of the cup. Cup weight is very important. Now, statistically, this comes from Ralph Bauer, absolute putting expert, my coach for 6 years. He is a firm believer that 1 foot past the hole is perfect speed, and I agree with that. Stats say that. But I also think that if you're a very aggressive putter, you want to work on working towards spilling it on the front edge. And if you're very tentative on the greens, you want to work on slamming it into the back. So understand your style. Again, that's another Jack Nicklaus trait right there. For him, the right hand, his trail hand, was the leader. Now, I think that's because he was right hand dominant. Like, Jack wasn't a lefty like Tom Watson with his dominant hand. He was a righty, so he felt like more of the work was done with his right hand. You'll also see this with Tiger Woods. I mentioned this last week with the one-handed putting, doing that as a warm-up. I'm a lefty as a right-handed golfer, so I always feel like there's a little more pressure on my lead hand, and this does the work, and my right hand is just along for the ride. Alignment was crucial. Like, you should have something that you do on a daily basis at home where you're working on your alignment with your feet, alignment with your shoulders, alignment with your knees, alignment with your grip. Like, alignment is everything when it comes to putting. And if your alignment is typically off, then it's not the end of the world, but you want to make sure you take care of it. I think the one big alignment mistake that I see with most of the guys that come in and see me for lessons, and even good players get into this trap too, is where their feet start aiming at the target. And your feet want to be away from the target. If you look at Jack, if you look at John Rahm, if you look at Tiger Woods, their feet are always open towards the target. I mean, these are all the secrets right here. Like, there's nothing that is really a secret. It's all the fundamentals that really carry you to that next level. And then I'll come up with a few examples here. The shaft being upright. You got like Chris DeMarco, Bryson DeChambeau, Steve Stricker, all very good putters. When DeMarco switched to more an upright claw grip, he became a great putter. If you get that putter more upright, I believe the limit is around 79. I would have to check that. But challenge yourself. Go to your local shop and even take an old putter first to do this if you can, or take your new putter if you're more bold with it, and tilt it upright by about 2 to 3 degrees. And you're going to find that your putting stroke is much more closer to straight back, straight through. I mean, there's no such thing as a straight back, straight through motion. If there was, then the putters would be illegal at 90 degrees, like just straight up and down. So there's a legal limit on how much you can actually do it. But Jack stood his putter up quite tall and allowed for the stroke to go a lot more. Basically he was big on keeping the face square through impact. So that's all I got for Jack Nicklaus. We covered course management, mental game, speed, putting, a lot of stuff that we went through today. Take 1 or 2 little things that you can from each of those that I gave you and just grind on them. I think that's the most important thing, is when you put it into your practice plan, you want it to be very simple. So thank you so much. Leave a comment, subscribe, share it with your friends. I'm really enjoying doing this podcast. And if you have any suggestions on what you want to learn about, please let me know in the comments below.